Gun for shooting. Bang, bang, bang. Un for cowboys. Unfortunate Gibbon. These are all scrapped alternate titles for today's film. See if you can noodle out what it is while we introduce the show. It's Frame Rate, the one where we rate frames. Oh, grr, my paw. He shot my paw. Yeah, indeed he did. And he is the titular eponymous Abe Epperson. Hi, Abe.
Hi, and of course, I'm figuratively sitting next to the other host, Michael Swaim.
I like to think that we're on a little scaffold and you sit one row below me.
That is exactly how I imagine.
Great. Like a gallows, if you will, with a trap door so I can relieve myself or drop onto you for a surprise attack. Whatever needs to happen.
Whatever if we're feeling like a little bit, rascally today.
That's right.
Maybe we'll just wrestle.
I think we're feeling probably ornery in the parlance of this genre because we're talking one of the classic Westerns, and we chose it for a particular reason. I think we want to dig into the history of Westerns a bit and the titular eponymous Clint Eastwood himself. I know I'm using those terms incorrectly. Don't at me. But we're talking about Unforgiven. Which I added G2 because it's got guns in it, and that pleases me.
You are forgiven for all these kills. Unforgiven, 1992.
Yeah.
Clint Eastwood directed, written by David Webb Peoples, Gene Hackman, Morgan Freeman, Richard Harris.
That's
true.
That's
what we're talking about.
Wait. Oh, I'm thinking of Ed Harris. I was like, I didn't see Richard Harris in there, but I'm thinking of Pollock. Or what was that sniper movie?
Sometimes
Enemy at the Gates.
Those Enemy at the Gates. Pollock and Unforgiven.
Yep.
They're just the same in my head. Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. I think the reason that we want to do this one, even though it's like comes out of nowhere, probably from, looking at our catalog, is that it's like there's a cool thing about Westerns. I mean, people love them, hate them, whatever, but like they have a storied tale in American cinema. Clint Eastwood has been making and directing movies. Some may not know that he's directed movies since the 70s. He directed Westerns. So he's not just like Letters from Iwo Jima guy.
And that's also why we want, because Cry Macho is currently, setting the world on fire. So we wanted to, well, it just got us thinking about Clint Eastwood, his place in history, which at some point soon has to be winding down. And
he's old as dirt.
He's old as fuck. And so it feels like we have enough Clint Eastwood track record to take a look at what we do, which is the more philosophical piece of like, so where's Clint Eastwood fit at the end of the day? What's his little narrative in the dialectic of art and film? So we'll be talking Unforgiven, but not just Unforgiven. Should we run through Unforgiven for people? I feel bad for people who haven't seen it. It's a classic.
You should go watch it. It is 2 hours long. It's 130 minutes. But it's it feels like a fast one for a Western. I know Westerns have the tendency to be slow. This one does move, so I don't know.
Well, you could listen to this episode, I think, as a guide of whether you want to watch it if you haven't seen it. Or if you're a genre fan, like if you like Westerns, then you probably already know about Unforgiven. But I think Unforgiven does have a special place in the Western, like the evolution of the Western genre. And at the same time, it's a nexus point where it's an interesting point in Clint Eastwood's evolution. But at the same time, I don't say go watch it without reservation. And should we synopsize it before I tell you why?
Yeah, I want to give one more thing before we synopsize it that I think will put it in context. What I think, what he's talking about right now is that Unforgiven is a revisionist Western, which means that if you look at the classic Western film, it's good guys beat bad guys. This has a little bit more anti-heroes. It kind of portrays the West as kind of frankly, an awful place to be. And for whatever reason, it kind of puts the classic tone of a Western or the classic themes of a Western on notice. So it's that kind of film versus the good guys round up the bad guys and and we did it, and you're the best. You know, it's not as cut and dry. It's definitely gray.
Well,
but let people decide.
I wasn't referring to that, but that's very, very well said and apt, and something that I think is vital to the conversation. But just as a little preview of what we'll be talking about, I'm also referring to the fact that, looking back now, realizing at the end of his life that Clint Eastwood, I think in a lot of ways, socially and politically, is a step behind the general progressive thought in this country. And looking back, I see that in Unforgiven now too. I think there's also problematic aspects to the film. Jamie Loftus would have been a good guest, but she's too busy, so it's just us.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that.
Westerns are built around the myth of masculinity, and this definitely still has that. Despite revising other aspects of the Western, which is what's so fascinating about it. Okay. So this is good SEO, man. I just learned this from my new boss at IGN, who's great with trends and SEO and shit. He's
What's SEO?
Search engine optimization. The way to get the algorithm to like your content. What we did is we teased what we're going to talk about, so people who are interested know to stick around for the entire duration. But now we'll get into it and synopsize, and then we'll get to that juicy shit.
So you're saying this is how the search engines will like us?
Yeah, little bot spiders are scanning us right now and just deciding whether it's
wriggling all over my skin, going I love you, Abe. Good job, Abe.
But if someone hasn't seen Unforgiven, this is the formless. Frame rate's more of the formless format, which I like. So I think we can just ramble on, partner.
We'll just blast away on this one.
Yeah. I want to make a note about, you haven't seen The Homesman, have you?
No, I actually haven't seen The Homesman.
Western. Okay, Hilary Swank. I think that's an interesting one to pair with this if anyone out there listening has seen it and this resonates for them, just because when I finished The Homesman, I thought, now there's a movie about how just the West was hard to live in and it sucked and there's nothing else to it. The only message is, damn, I'm just glad I'm not them. This sure does suck for them.
Right, yeah. I think of Shane because Shane is the first real footprint. I mean, some people say High Noon, but first footprint of the artist himself saying the thing I've been doing forever, I'm self-aware that it's nonsense, you know?
Oh, well, Shane is a really, truly a flirtation with it, because Shane was shot so ambiguously that people at the time argued about whether he's dead in that last shot at the end or he's fine. He's just riding away, slumped in his saddle.
He wanted to subvert everything.
And this all ties in so beautifully. We're big Western nerds, so we know a lot of the side avenues, but, yeah, to what we're talking about, because Shane, the ending of Shane, flirting with the idea that maybe the hero dies at the end, which at that time was, whoa.
That was enough. And
Unforgiven is yet another, evolution of what if we, and I like to compare it to Burn After Reading, is to the spy genre, sort of as Unforgiven is to the Western. They're what if we one by one take each classic Western trope and deconstruct it, or at least fractal it into an extra layer of complexity it didn't have before. Yeah, and by classic Westerns, we mean stuff like, John Ford's The Searchers, Sergio Leone's Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Even that's kind of a reaction to, I guess I meant Fistful of Dollars.
Not the spaghettis, because the spaghettis are a little bit more look at these fucking idiots. Shoot, I mean, we love what they're doing, but they did love at the same time to kind of stab American culture.
That's true.
A little bit, but that's for another podcast. But I do love talking just the entire ecosystem of Westerns. It's one of the coolest genres. And I'm not just saying it because I'm I love Westerns and bang 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 bang. I mean, it's one of the first times that just a genre for no reason, because it was emphatically American. The entire world stopped, looked, and said, "Oh, I want to make that too. That's so cool." And they did their own thing with it. The Russians made Westerns. Yeah, it's just really an international, and just a lot of people kind of bringing their different ideas to what the genre is, and that's what kind of makes it interesting to me.
And it's great that it has periods of going completely out of fashion, because to me it makes it seem like it's a thing. You can actually be a scholar of it because it's limited in its scope. It's like Westerns. Yeah. You can watch them all theoretically, or at least close to. But anyway, Unforgiven stands as a very important one. And it fuck, I should know this. What was Clint's directorial debut? Was that A Perfect World or Unforgiven?
No, Clint Eastwood's directorial debut? It was like in the 70s. It was like a comedy, like a Western comedy, I want to say. Like, he's been directing films forever.
Oh, I thought he started directing later through his career.
No,
Play Misty for Me is the first feature he directed in 1971. Yeah. Shit, okay.
And he did, like, Wagons East and stuff. Yeah. Like, he did a lot of big-budget Westerns. I think the popular notion that Clint Eastwood, it's like Unforgiven was the big one for him, or like a first in some sense, is that it is one of the first times that he was making, like, I'm kind of hopeful that this is like this is an Oscar movie. Like, I'm trying really hard here. I'm not just doing this, thing where I'm going out there and I'm just like, what do they want? What's the pulp? What's, like, I know Pale Rider and a lot of those other ones, Escape from Alcatraz, were like a little bit more attempts to be cut above. But like, after he did Unforgiven, he did like In the Line of Fire, he did Bridges in Madison County. So like, he clearly in the 90s was like going for, I am going to become kind of the golden standard of big movies. So he definitely came into his own as like a new, I guess what we'd call a new threshold of artist, or a new
Mystic River, $1 Million Baby. This Unforgiven is the first one that feels like what we now call a Clint Eastwood movie. Like, if you notice how Weird Al there's a point after which Weird Al always packages his albums the same. Like, every other one is original, every other one is a parody, and the last one's really long and it's a parody of a band rather than a song. Clint Eastwood figured out his formula with Unforgiven. Unforgiven maps to, even to the point that the main theme of Unforgiven, like the guitar string piece, Clint wrote that. Flash forward to fucking Gran Torino with him singing the main theme, which is a total misstep. But in the early days, it was still working because he didn't make the mistake of trying to sing over it.
Yeah, I think he does a lot of stuff. He's like, that one's for the olds, like, because he knows where he came from.
For the Clint heads.
I mean, he knows that like his bread and butter was people who are his age. So he wants to make movies for them too. I don't think there's anything wrong about that. It's just, I would like it if young people got to make movies too. That's just my personal opinion on that. But I think absolutely he's an old man. He makes old films. But he definitely came to a new kind of version of how his works kind of where their place was in the echelon of film in the 90s. He definitely came to his own.
So in this old film, he plays William Money, a guy who we learned from a scrolling text used to be a bad, bad man. And
murderer, thief,
and famously importune demeanor or whatever, like vicious, pernicious attitude. Yeah. He's a sumbitch. And he's got two shitty blonde kids who are just filthy, living in the mud in goddamn bumfuck nowhere. Pigs die. All the pigs got the eye
shittiest
cancer
fence
or
you've
whatever
ever
they got.
seen.
Yeah,
this guy's the worst pig farmer.
Just dirt patch Iowa. They're clearly gonna die any day now.
How he's probably good at killing people because he's not good at farming.
Exactly, and his wife Clara, I think Clara, Clara Feathers.
Yeah.
Anyway, his beloved wife passed away, and we learned that she taught him to fear God and be good and not cuss and stop killing people and repent of his ways, and mainly quit drinking, because that's when he
drinking wickedness
really get mean.
And he takes
John Wick out on people. Yeah.
In this movie, he goes out of his way to tell everyone about this. He's like, God rest her soul, Clara, who cured me of drinking wickedness. Took the bottle out of my hand. He just loves her so much. Even though in the events of the film, which is 1880, she's dead. She's been dead for like 2 years.
It's interesting to me, and I swear I'll let us synopsize the movie, but it feels. When I first saw this movie, it felt like such a radical departure from the Westerns I was familiar with. that it felt like a whole new world, like Westerns have been flipped on its head. I think what's interesting to note as we synopsize is it's not that. It's a half-step evolution. But
yeah,
that's enough to give you that feeling of, holy shit, I've never seen anything like this before. But when you look carefully, you do see how this is built on existing Westerns and movie tropes.
It's built on the themes and the disposition of the characters are the same. So
for example, he's a washed-up gunslinger past his prime who's going to do one more job because he needs the money so bad. That's not revolutionary, but
he's still a gunslinger.
Way it's handled step by step is pretty revolutionary for the time. So
yeah, I mean, it's little maneuvers like you said, like, oh, he's got a family and he's like kind of a family man, and then you go, oh, okay, there's a lot of Westerns that have like someone's been ripped out of it, but usually their family like gets killed in a fire or something like that. This one, it's like he actually chooses to leave.
Oh, and he like abandons his kids for 2 weeks in this place alone, and the oldest one is like 11 maybe. And you can't help but think like, man, John Wayne wouldn't do this. Like, he's a bad dad. This is weird.
Like he seems like he's drawn to it.
But basically, what happens in the, well, it's not really the B plot, just cut over to the inciting incident, which is a sex worker at gets I'm not going to use the word the film uses, but you know, they use the Wild West term constantly in the movie. But the person who works at a brothel giving out billiards, which is the euphemism in this film, they play billiards, laughs at a dude's tiny dick, and he basically, you know, cuts him up, like slashes on him with a knife. And importantly, his buddy that was there with him also going to the brothel is like, no, stop, trying to pull him off, which complicates the matter later because they both get punished for the sins of this one douchebag. So eventually Delilah, who's a sex worker, they do separate them, and she's not killed, but she's in a bad way.
Permanently disfigured. And that, according to the rules of, you know, in this universe, obviously, that affects the effectiveness of her as a sex worker, which then therefore you know, unsurprisingly for the West, you know, the brothel owner gets involved, and he is like, you owe me restitution for this, like you need to give me stuff. And which is a nice little...
And the sheriff, Little Bill, played ably by Gene Hackman, who's always good, basically playing the same character he plays in The Quick and the Dead.
Yeah. I mean, The Quick and the Dead was second. But like it's the same thing. He's so mean and so kind of evil, and everyone's terrified of him that he basically owns the town.
He's the gunslinger with utmost confidence. That's who he plays in both those films. And he just oozes cold confidence and is like, oh, no, that's not how you kill a man. This is how you kill a man, and then calmly kills everyone in the room. He's that type of guy. In fact, if you've seen Quick and the Dead, they do the same maneuver where someone boasts about being a great gunslinger, and then he's like, I was really there. You were drunk as fuck. You didn't really shoot that guy. He missed you 3 times. Anyhow, he gets introduced, and he sides with the misogynistic, like, male gaze version of law at the time, which is the sex workers all demand some kind of justice for the actual victim. But he goes, no, you owe 5 horses to the owner of the bar, and you owe 2 horses to the owner of the bar, and bring him in when the thaw comes, or so help me, I'll come beat the shit out of you.
Yeah,
and basically the eldest, like, brood mother lady who looks after all the sex workers is like, you fucking kidding me? That's ridiculous. This is a miscarriage of justice. So they decide to pool all their money, and it amounts to $1,000, and they put out a wanted dead or alive, I think specifically dead, an assassination notice, like, hey,
contract killing.
We don't want the horses. Kill these guys. And at the time in the Wild West, that's not legal, but people will take you up on it. So we're in this quasi. And meanwhile, Little Bill, the sheriff, wants more than anything for his town to have order, and he hates assassins. So he vows to, like, no, that's not happening. Yet, because we all operate under this weird Western code, even though Little Bill will readily beat the shit out of anyone, he won't beat the shit out of the sex workers directly, even though he's like, I know you did this. You're fucking up my town. I like order in my town. So we're at this stalemate. where Little Bill can't stop the fact that the news is out, but he, by God, anyone who comes looking for that money, he vows to run him out of town. And like I just alluded to, we get one instance of that where it's funny, but I'm going to boil it down to just a tiny thing, where this British guy thinks he's tough shit and rolls into town. It's a great sequence, honestly. And talking all big, Little Bill arrests him, drags him to the street, beats the ever-loving shit out of him, keeps him in jail for a while, steals his biographer. Like, his biographer who came with him is now more interested in Little Bill and runs him out of town. And he leaves town going like, "You're all savages, you American pieces of shit." Which I always wondered if that referenced like spaghetti westerns in some way, but then I figured he'd be Italian.
Yeah, no. Meanwhile,
with William Money.
Yeah, so so now that the word is out, we just assume that because it's like a few weeks later, the Schofield kid, who's this young kind of boastful gunslinger, comes to Will Money's hog farm and asks him, we'll split it 50-50. Let's get this money because I've heard of you and you're like the meanest son of a bitch ever. And I need someone who's going to be like mean. And Will, of course, does the thing that he always does when anyone accuses him of, having a tortured past, which is that he admits it and he says that his wife, cured him of that. And he's over that, the whiskey, the killing. But after he leaves, after he notices that, after Schofield Kid leaves, he notices that his hogs have been getting the fever.
A delivery that's been stuck in my head since I was a little kid is that little girl going, sometimes I hear it in my head and I forget it's from this movie. "Pa, I found 2 more. They think they got the fever."
Yeah, the fever.
Yeah, 2 more hogs got the fever.
I do have a theory about the hogs and the fever, because at first there's 2 hogs and then they noticed another one.
Yeah.
And then the next day they noticed 2 more have got it. And I think that it's probably looking too much into it, but there's a weird procession there. I think the first 2 hogs and the concept of fever, first 2 hogs are the 2 cowboys, Quick Mike
just
and Davey Bunting.
Dirty hogs.
Dirty hogs. The third is the Schofield kid because he hears about that. And the last 2 are Will and Ned. Ned being Morgan Freeman, who we're going to meet in a second. And it's, to me, the idea of that the fever is contract to violence. Like, you're becoming a party to this bloody involvement in this film.
I agree. I think it's there.
Yeah. The only thing that it doesn't count is Sheriff Daggett. But I think he's just off. He's always been.
Is that his name? Little Bill Daggett?
Little Bill.
Okay.
Gene Hackman.
No.
Anyway, when he realized that he's just the shittiest farmer, he realizes
we need the money real bad.
The future of his children is like basically failing. So he decides to. The Schofield kid did mention, he's like, "Hey, I'm going on this trail and I'm gonna be traveling down to Wyoming. So like, you just follow me and you catch up with me if you change your mind." Before he does that, though, Will does get on his horse and one of the Clint Eastwood does this thing where he likes to. He loves comedy. He's always been a part of comedy. He especially loves comedy where it's the, like, not the demasculization, but the Homer Simpson, the making fool of someone who should be by all rights big, so he takes his big cowboys who are large in life and he makes them not able to get on a horse, and stuff like that. There's like a few humor scenes where he's just, he's really old, really shitty at doing the thing that apparently came natural to him like 20 years ago. But before he catches up with the Schofield kid, he recruits his friend Ned Logan, who is played by Morgan Freeman, who's another retired like outlaw living with his wife. And they decide, and he pitches to him, "Hey, let's, get the whole band together, more or less, and just get some quick money."
Whole band of murderers.
And catch up with the kid. And then there's this kind of like vignette that happens. It's back in Wyoming, where Richard Harris, the man who played a man called Horse. So he's got his own Western kind of pedigree. Historic Western. Yeah, exactly. Richard Harris plays really one of the better roles in the film. Kind of a constantly talking British gunfighter, English Bob, and he's like a rival, I guess, or just like him and Little Bill, basically. Used to kick around, not together, but like they just had seen each other time and time again.
I feel I already synopsized this. You want to go into it and actually unpack it scene by scene?
No.
I think that's too long. Okay.
So basically, after Little Bill ejects Bob from the town and basically tells him, "Hey, like, you piece of shit, I'm done with you."
I agree with you. It's one of the best parts of the movie, though.
Yeah, right. All the stuff with the writer with Beauchamp, just because I think we needed to say that name, who's played by Saul Rubinek, also. So StatCast.
You'll probably know as either the guy who steals data in TNG episode The Most Toys. Or
it's a deeper cut than Unforgiven.
Or the guy who marries Daphne before divorcing her and before Niles marries Daphne on Frasier.
Frasier, baby.
He's a great actor, dude. He always does a good
really
job.
Good.
Yeah.
He's really good. So now we kind of have the stage set. You got Will, you got Ned, you got the kid. They're all coming into town.
Oh, and you've established that the kid is really hard of seeing because he tries to shoot at them and misses wildly.
And they're like, and that's also a fun scene because like Morgan Freeman is like, "You see that hog up there? I could shoot that hawk. How you think you can shoot that hog?" He's like, "Yeah, I can shoot that hawk." He's like, "There's no hawk. You're blind as shit." And he gets really, and of course with the masculinity in full tilt.
And the kid's like, "Well, I've killed 5 guys. How many guys have you killed?"
Yeah. He's all questioning me. I have the right to shoot you, because he's quick to the gun. Basically, when they arrive in town, they go to meet at the brothel to like basically accept the contract.
And this is why I think your pig thing is probably intentional. They go up to have sex with the sex workers. Meanwhile, Clint stays downstairs because A, he believes in following the righteous path and not cheating on the memory of Clara or whatever, but also B, he's got the fever.
Yeah, he's like shaking.
He's like out of it. Yeah. And not drinking, but he seems drunk because he's out of it. So Little Bill comes because Little Bill has made an ordinance to keep anyone from trying to kill those 2 cowpokes. It's basically a movie about like when cops kill someone and get off real easy, but in one instance. But Lil Bill is like determined to let his version of justice hold sway. Like I said, these guys live, so they live. God damn it! And meanwhile, I think it's important to note Lil Bill has sort of become infatuated with the idea of having, because I think this symbolically runs deep, having the biographer around. Even though Little Bill was like dismissive of Bob having a biographer, then he's like, "Come here, biographer. I'll tell you the real shit."
Because he feels like he's the real shit.
Everyone thinks they're the real shit.
That's it's not even symbolic. It's actually just like subtext.
It's cool. I love it. Yeah.
It's very good, and it's a really good way to debunk the kind of mythos.
Well, I think it's lightly symbolic of the various subgenres of Western, like talking to one another. But we'll get into that after. So he basically made an ordinance saying you can't even carry a gun in town, and he's pretty sure that Clint and Ned have guns. Will and Ned and the kid. So
which he's right about.
Which he's correct about. So he sends some people to arrest Clint, and Clint seems more adversarial than he really meant to be because he's all fucked up. So he goes like, "Do you have a gun?" Hiding. And he goes, No. But he's just like muttering and like, he's like, "But I see your gun," or whatever.
He's like, "I don't want no trouble."
Yeah, and shit gets out of hand. And I believe, much like he did to Wild Bill, he kicks the shit out of Will, and Will like drags his ass out the front of the saloon. Meanwhile, the sex workers warn Ned and the Schofield kid, and they jump out the window and run away. Little Bill runs upstairs and was like, "I wanted to kick the shit out of those 2 too." And they're like, "Well, they jumped out the window." And he's like, "That proves they're guilty." And they're like, "No, they just saw you beating up their friends, so they ran away."
Right.
In the interest so they all hide in a field. Yeah.
Speeding it along, I'll just say they're good scenes. But the trio basically kill the 2 of them. there's the two of the cowboys, the people who started all of them. They start by killing one in like the middle of like a canyon with a rifle, and we notice that Ned decides right then and there that he just can't kill anymore, so he puts down the gun and so Clint Eastwood shoots him for it. And it's a horrible death. The guy gets like shot in the gut and he's like crying and he's...
It's the nice quote unquote guy who was trying to pull his friend. Like we remember from the first scene, he was trying to stop his friend who cut him up. Meanwhile, the game of telephone in the Wild West is such that like the kid told Clint Eastwood they both did it, and they cut her boobs off, and they cut her ears off, and they cut her nose off. Meanwhile, so like everyone's working with faulty information also, which I think is interesting.
I think that's, exactly. It makes people enraged because people like to
justify what they need language. To do or whatever.
Yeah, so they kill them, but then Ned decides, you know what, guys, I'm out. Like I clearly can't kill anyone, even though he's like the best shot of the group. He's like, I just can't. So he goes, the other two, the Schofield kid and William Money, decide to basically wait by another good scene where it's like they wait by an outhouse and they shoot the guy who actually did the actual cutting on Delilah. And so the Schofield kid delivers the last kind of blasts, and he just shoots him while he's shitting. So they have completed the contract. And so the next day they kind of like go out to a field, and one of the sex workers like moseys on up and says, here's your money and all that. And and then Will and talks to Schofield. Oh, we should probably mention that as she's like saddling up, there's a whole conversation with the Schofield kid that is revealed that he has killed no one, even though he said he's killed 5 men. And he's kind of he's a liar, and this is the first man that he's killed, and he's drinking and crying.
I'm never going to do this again. Notably, he says, because earlier in the movie, very good script. The script is incredible. Good job, David Webb Peoples. The earlier in the script, he said, I believe the resonant line is something like, but I ain't like him. And he's talking to Ned, saying that he's a real killer, unlike William Money, who he perceives to be weak now because he gave up killing.
That whole scene has so many good lines.
And now later in the film, he's crying because he just killed someone, and he says, I can't do this anymore. I'm not like you, Will. Because now he perceives that William Money is a cold-blooded fucking murderer, which he is because he can calmly kill if he needs to. And yet, when he gets the fever, he raves to Ned saying like, I'm so scared to die because I know I'm going to hell. I saw Clara and she had worms in her face. Like, I know that I'm going to hell, essentially. I'm unforgiven. Get it? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
But pretty interesting stuff. So when they get the money at this same instance, she says, unfortunately, it's sad about your friend. And they're like, what the fuck? And she goes, your friend Ned, they caught him on the way south and they killed him. And Clint, good performance, is like, no, they didn't. Why would anyone kill Ned? No. And basically goes John Wick on everyone because the moment you do it is she says Ned is dead, and he goes okay, and he grabs the bottle of whiskey from the kid and like drinks the rest of the bottle, and you're like,
going full tilt. And this is and I want dear reader, I want you to remember this moment, because just the glee in our voices, but also I want us to think collectively as film goers, this is the sauce of Unforgiven. It's like in Rocky, it's the fight, right? It's the last 9 minutes of Rocky. It's the last 9 minutes of Unforgiven. We wanted him this way.
But isn't that what kind of fails as a full deconstruction? Because that's my point, is I would think in a full evolution, he would follow through and not go John Wick on everyone.
Yeah. Let's get into it. So let's just summarize the last.
Sure.
It's pretty awesome, and he goes John Wick on everyone. He kills everybody.
He kills everyone, including Gene Hackman. And Gene Hackman has a great ending where he's like, but I'm a good gunslinger or whatever. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve to die like this.
Got nothing to do with it.
Deserves got nothing to do with it. Shoots him point blank in the head. No,
with a rifle.
No quick draw. No, like, he's just like, I'm here to kill you. I'm going to cheat and kill you by just shooting at you point blank. The end, motherfucker.
So as promised, the kind of epilogue is just like he gave half the because Schofield Kid turned down all the money. He gave half the money to Ned's family and took the other half, went to San Francisco, and apparently is doing well in dry goods. That's like it. There's a lot to unpack, and I think like let's just because I just want to do it as we go. We'll bring up little details, but I think now I would love to talk about kind of the Western deconstruction aspect that you're mentioning and why it really is and isn't a revisionist Western.
Isn't. And I think it's so emblematic of what Clint Eastwood is and isn't.
Great. Let's go.
Well, okay. I guess I'll start with the negative first because it is obvious with modern eyes, and I think it's indicative of how we mainly regard Clint Eastwood now, which is in my personality bubble. Most of the people I interact with who think mostly like me are like, oh, Clint Eastwood, irrelevant, old, out of touch, kind of mean, kind of borderline racist sometimes type guy. But there was a time at which he was radical, and that's interesting to me. But the stuff that through a modern like critical race theory lens would ping, right, is like Morgan Freeman, who's been complicit in this role in this way many times in his career, is almost like a magically wise, magically pure black man who's there to be whipped, which, you know, evocative of like fetishizing the slave experience, and then killed horribly and basically fridged to give a meaning to Clint. And the meaning is, well, something had to tip him over the edge. He's got to go John Wick on everyone, which is funny when you consider that the point of the movie is that he's like, you know, you don't always have to go John Wick on everyone. That's the bold statement. So I do think the film is still rooted in traditional action movie tropes in a way that does make it less revolutionary structurally than something like A No Country for Old Men, which of course is why I go back to the Coens, because it's the best of the best, but or at least the most extreme in terms of experimentation with confidence.
They've done a Western that deconstructed the Western in a very effective way. This does less work to do it, but it's notable because it's Clint Eastwood, who is... He's the king. He's the king of Western for America.
Right.
You know, like he is the guy. He's John Wayne too. And honestly, he's kind of the better John Wayne so far.
Yeah.
And it's just like one of those things of like one of the greats looking back and kind of reacting to their own source material. But for examples of effective deconstruction, it's shit like the rifle sequence, which is where... So normally in a John Wayne Western, if you shot someone on a canyon far below with a rifle, they would crumple to the ground and they stop moving. Their extra has completed their work on the film. In this, there's a whole sequence where he shoots the guy in the belly with his last shot. And the kid goes, "Did you kill him? Did you kill him?" And he goes, "I don't know. I guess like he'll die. I got him.
I think he's dying." And then you hear him scream, oh, Jesus, I don't want to die." But it's not just that. They go so far as to go, and I love this. So it's like, it's the opposite of how John Wayne would do it.
Right.
It's not, it's indulgent. He goes like, I'm so goddamn thirsty. And Clint goes, "Will you just bring him some water for Christ's sake? We won't shoot. Someone bring water."
God damn it. Yeah. And
it's rough.
I do agree that this is actually one of the things that Unforgiven did give to all later Westerns. Because something we mentioned on the Quick and the Dead podcast with Katie Stoll is I was talking about how it kind of jump-started a new Western movement. Westerns have been kind of dead since the 80s, like 70s-ish. And then in the 90s, we did have like Dances with Wolves, I guess is kind of a Western. But classic Western, we got Unforgiven, and then we got a slew of like Posse, Tombstone, Dead Man, Quick and the Dead, Wild Bill, you know, like we got a bunch of them. And the 2000s and the 2010s have kind of had a lot of them. This is one of the moments where when you look at like 2000s and the 2010s and you think of movies like The Hateful Eight or The Proposition or 3:10 to Yuma or like The Revenant, these movies display this exact kind of thing, the brutality of the West. That
it's
brutality
the new story that we tell to ourselves about the West.
The brutality of the West had been talked about a lot in the 70s, like High Plains Drifter, Jeremiah Johnson, but like these movies did not really display it because audiences weren't ready until the 90s, and Unforgiven did it. And now we have it in spades. It like dominates the...
I think in a nutshell, I'd say that I thought Unforgiven gave us a fully deconstructed Western about the importance of peace.
Right.
When I was a kid. And now I view it in a more critical light, and I think it gave us the gritty reboot of the Western. It still is classical in its beats, but it's just gritty. It literally is the application of one more layer of nuance. Like the Schofield kid gives a monologue that would happen in any John Wayne movie. I popped him 1, 2, 3, first one right in the chest. Hooey, and I've killed 5 men. But he starts crying in the middle of it, which is the opposite of what would happen in a John Wayne Western.
Exactly. And that is something that is unique to Unforgiven. Yeah, I think you make a great point because even the anti-heroes, because they are anti-heroes because they have troubled pasts, they're not, you know, morally...
Well, and even Clint has come to view his own actions as, and I think this is really important and something that resonated so hard with me, of course, and is overlooked completely in classic Westerns, other than maybe like True Grit, where Rooster Cogburn's an alcoholic, and it's still treated charmingly. But like, I love that the kid was like, these philosophical questions about like, how did it feel? How do you feel the first time you saw someone's eyes and you knew that you killed them?
Right.
And he goes, I don't know, man. I was drunk most of the time. That's a very important note to add on to Westerns. They're all drunk most of the time, man. That's why they fight.
Remember.
Even Little Bill says, what about that epic shootout between Bob and that guy? And he goes,
it wasn't that epic.
Well, they're both like shit-faced, so he missed because he's drunk, and then he tried to shoot him. Eventually, one guy just walked up to the other guy and shot him point blank. It was pretty sad.
You know, as we've learned with, you know, like research, and it's a little bit more, you know, pop culturally known, the Western didn't have a lot of deaths, and most of the deaths were people getting drunk and shooting each other. And guess what we did with that? We called it like the shootout at the OK
romantic
Corral.
era of the duel.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just like, just like they popped off a few shots, 2 people died, and like everyone talked about it because it was a big event. Nothing happened. Mostly it was fever and dying of like
TB
ringworm or some shit. Yeah.
So I play Red Dead, you know? He doesn't get killed in a gunfight.
Yeah. But I think getting back to like the ethos of the Western hero, in this movie, there's still heroic people doing good, just like the classic Western genres. As you mentioned, the events are more tragic, the themes are more gray, but ultimately, all of the work that they did to manipulate us into thinking that, you know, Will is a bad guy, it's still true, but he does the right thing for the people who cannot defend themselves. So basically, he's doing it because he's doing it for a good cause. Will can be glorified to a certain aspect. So it does fall in line with the classic genre kind of bend of this, of there is good moral and there's bad moral.
And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I just think that the ending of this movie is really good to make you think one thing, but really it is doing the other thing. It's very satisfying to see Clint Eastwood look down on Gene Hackman, and he's like, I'll see you in hell, Will Money. And he goes, yeah. You know, like he it doesn't believe he's a good guy. Yeah. And everything he says is the words of a bad guy, but he's doing it because his friend Ned died, because like he's not doing it anymore for, you know, any... He came out of the like woodworks to help all the sex workers, but like now he's just on tilt because he just doesn't like that they did that to Ned. And that's kind of the crucial difference, is that he's just doing things because he now believes he's doing good. That's the closest this film gets to being subversion, is that it is vigilante justice. But you realize when you look back at classic Western, all of the classic Westerns talked about this justice, as a theme.
And they talk about it, but they don't make it hurt. They don't make it feel bad.
You feel it. Yeah. And this one does.
Unforgiven makes you feel it, which I think that perfectly encapsulates a truth about Clint Eastwood, which is that he is a half step, like as a person and as an artist. And I think he came up in a system that he fully lives and breathes and understands, to the point that he regurgitates exactly what Oscar, like, look no further than this era and for the next like 15 years of Clint Eastwood movies, for like, that's what the Academy, that's what was considered high but mainstream art at the time. He's like right in there at a time when Spielberg is turning in stuff like War Horse and War of the Worlds that aren't quite hitting in the way Spielberg usually does. Clint Eastwood kind of carried that torch in a quiet way. I mean, between Mystic River and $1 Million Baby, he's just like, Oscars, please, and Letters from My Father, or Letters from Iwo Jima, or whatever, Flags of Our Father.
Dude, the 2000s were bleak, era. Man. They were bleak.
And that's what is interesting is that at the end of the day, this guy who's pretty traditional is still the best we have. Like, I don't know, because it's funny. I really like Unforgiven, but in other ways, I couldn't help but realize that it highlights that, you know, if you don't, and this isn't limited to whatever gender you, the listener or viewer, express, anyone can be interested in any kind of media, but you better be interested in big swinging dick, masculine, like epic. It's still doing the classic Western thing of like polishing the legend of the white male cowboy. Like,
let's talk about this.
Look how badass John Wick is. And to do that, it literally subsumes the plight of the two big impacted classes in our country, which are the black guy gets horribly killed and the sex worker gets horribly, brutally, like their suffering is the emotional core of what's supposed to make the movie tick. You know, the princess in distress or whatever, the abuse of a woman who can't defend herself. I'm just saying Westerns enshrine those things. And if you're sick, and if anyone who says, I'm sick of that story where the guy saves the poor helpless chick, I would totally get that. If you're not sick of those yet, this is a good one that just happens to still fall into that mode of the male gaze and the traditional way that society runs, right? Where it's making its fodder off of like Ned and Delilah at the expense of Ned and Delilah, so that the two white men can face off, which is, it is what it is. I'm just pointing it out.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting notion in this film about the masculinity of the Western hero.
Another reason I love Breaking the Dead, by the way. Sharon Stone.
There's not, yeah, exactly. There's obviously much better, much more upfront kind of attacks on this trope, and rightfully so. I think that there's an interesting notion about this because of the subversion that this film is doing. And Clint Eastwood as a whole, and I think something you said at the beginning of this, which is that he is kind of good at it, but he's always like a beat or a decade behind, which is interesting because he was one of the first people to really acknowledge this in a time in like the 60s and 70s. He was making like Paint My Wagon and stuff like that. Like, he was subverting his own masculinity openly by doing musicals and stuff. I know these are like, eye-rolly kind of cringy tropes that like the old-timey people would say this is a subversion of the trope, and it's super basic. But like, he was there at the beginning, one of the first people who did it. Now you jump forward in time, and we have all moved on from that. And he's still kind of like, well, it's that, but I'm still not ready for myself to like
become irrelevant.
Become that relevant. Yeah, I just don't know if I agree with that. Because he's like a conservative old dude.
He's 93, and in Cry Macho, just like in Gran Torino, he's like, I do want to work with minorities, people of color, but it's still about me saving them. You know what I mean? Which is interesting.
Exactly.
Rather than doing what he should probably arguably do, which is step aside and foster other filmmakers whose time it is to now step onto the stage and shine.
Right.
I mean, Sidney Lumet stopped. I think Clint just beat Sidney Lumet, who before was the oldest living director, who directed Before the Devil Knows You're Dead at age 92. Clint just directed Cry Macho at 93 or 94, I'm pretty sure.
God.
Nuts,
this man's gonna live forever, apparently.
And he threw a punch in it, I hear.
It makes sense that he's like a cowboy who's like, every day I eat a steak.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that there are some clear indications of subversion of masculinity. I'm not just talking about someone who we put on a pedestal who happens to be male, like a cowboy falling off a horse. I'm talking about a man sitting on a tree who just shot someone and is crying about it. And the whole time he's been talking about how strong he is and how masculine he is and how he can kill anybody. The Western itself has always kind of conflated this strange form of violence with masculinity. And there's been many films that have kind of subverted that trope. Most recently, one of my favorite ones was The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, and what they do with masculinity in that film. It's pretty subtle, but in the same way that this film does. It's there. And I think that in the 90s, I'm not saying that it's the best. I'm saying in the 90s, if we talk about subverting masculinity in films, especially something like the Western, which is like the most masculine thing I can think of next to like sports movies.
The genre of Western smells like sweat dripping down a
Sweaty
nutsack
leather.
case. Yeah.
Which is, yeah. And the whole thing to me is that that crying scene, the scene with Ned, them talking about being not sleeping around. There's a scene with him and Delilah, as in Will and Delilah, where he's explaining that he can't do it because of his he can't take a quote free one because his wife, Delilah doesn't know that she's dead, and Delilah's like, I admire you for that. Once again, half measures. But if it weren't for that, I don't think we would get stuff.
But at the end of the day, then they have a weird scene that you don't really need, where the brood mother says to Delilah, oh, his wife's dead. And it cuts to Delilah looking disappointed, as if she's sad that he didn't want to fuck her because her face is cut up, which is, I just am saying, like, it's still clearly written from a male gaze. Because that's not, I don't think that's how the Western female would tell that story.
No, not at all. Yeah, not at all.
The
Western is always been written
she's
by
sad
men,
that she's too ugly to be fucked.
Yeah, exactly.
That's her motivation.
It's dumb, but that's not what I'm saying. That's auxiliary to me, because that's like, what you're absolutely right about that, and that is what this film is. That's why it's a half measure. It's almost one step forward, two steps back, or at least standing pat. Because it's in the most masculine genre that we can think of. And I think that there's something to be said about Clint Eastwood's actions in that regard. He did want to remove the veil of that. He won't go so far and write like a convincing female character. I mean, he didn't write it, but he won't go so far and try to tell a tale about that. But like I was saying, I don't think we would have The Quick and the Dead if it weren't for this film. I don't think we would, and therefore I like this idea about how film and culture propagates what the next films do. If we didn't have Quick and the Dead, we probably wouldn't have had Assassination of Jesse James, or at least the proposition, we probably wouldn't have the Assassination of Jesse James. And if we didn't have that, we probably wouldn't have True Grit. You know what I'm saying? This keeps kind of pushing it forward. And I think that understanding that people have their kind of place there and did their kind of half measures here and there doesn't mean that we should entomb the people. I say that he's dead. We should build a giant pyramid to honor them. I'm just saying that understanding the historical kind of network that is something like cinema is kind of interesting. And I think important.
Speaking of which, have you seen the trailer for The Power of the Dog?
Not yet.
Western with fucking... Yeah. I was going to say, if we didn't have Buster Scruggs, we wouldn't have The Power of the Dog, because it's Delmer as an amazing gun hand again. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes it's just like that. It's just like Gene Hackman reprising a role, right?
I swear Other to God, The Quick and the Dead is just Little Bill moved to a new town and started
it really
doing
is the
shit.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah. And everything gets, obviously I don't mean like Quick and the Dead wouldn't have existed if it weren't for Unforgiven only. Obviously, Quick and the Dead is like a smorgasbord of different, influences. Just as, Assassination of Jesse James is a bunch of different influences. Mm-hmm. The Revenant, there's probably someone could argue that The Revenant wouldn't have been made if it weren't for things like Game of Thrones, like the torture porn that is just like relentless.
Plus the idea things happen to someone. Now that we can do CG on anything, the way we really prove we spent a lot of money is we travel to exotic locales all over the world. That also, I think, ties into the Revenant impulse. Because definitely, there's no question to me that Leo got off on the idea of like, I really have to go to the Arctic and eat a fish raw from the river. Like, I'm fucking hardcore. That's part of the challenge for actors, I think, of a certain stripe.
Yeah. What we really haven't seen, and I think we're going to see very soon here, is an update on the Western where it's from the Native American perspective. Mm-hmm. Because that is one of the things that one of the greatest ills that is still yet to be kind of tackled by that genre.
Reckoned with in this country. Like, especially, I've said since the Cracked days, they need to make a native post-apocalypse story, because a fact that Jack O'Brien introduced me to in my life that everyone should obviously know is that, like, a lot of times uneducated white folks will think of Native Americans as like a loose affiliation of tribal peoples who came and got swept aside cruelly. But you're really underestimating, it wasn't a loose association of tribal nomadic peoples. It was like, the area where New York now was had a similar population. It had like millions of people living there or whatever. Like, there were huge cities and things that we wiped out. It is an incredible... There was such a built-up civilization that it's fair to say that civilization experienced the apocalypse. Like, their complete way of life was completely removed from the earth, and it's not like they were just dicking around camping, you know what I mean? Which I think in our ignorance some of us can sometimes envision it that way. But like, damn dude, I guess unfortunately, as much as I hate Mel Gibson, or like, for Central American peoples, there's some of this from like Apocalypto, but I can't think of any other movie where it's like native peoples dealing with the end of the civilization and what a radical shift that was.
Yeah, I think that there's like truth to that, because like there's no great way to do that. Like, the Western is a archetype that was built essentially on the bodies of Native Americans by
and
white
Mexican
people.
Folks, yeah.
Yeah, like basically we said we're going to tell these stories of how we genocided, and we're going to do this shit and like remember it fondly.
Like, what a crazy adventurous time that was when we were doing that genocide. And that's indicative of
and that's another way that film is not the enemy here. It's indicative. Well, I mean, it can be because it perpetuates it. Culture is the enemy here, right? And
it's true that you could say the genre of the Western is an exercise in whitewashing history.
Yes, exactly. That is exactly right. And I think that because of that, that's why probably a lot of Native American, Central American filmmakers have avoided it entirely, because they're just like, fuck that entire genre.
Westerns, sell out genre.
But whatever, I do want to do, like, there's something bittersweet about, like, I'm gonna do it right in front of you, and like, I'm gonna fuck with your brain.
It's just my Star Wars
in your palate.
I just like the elements that comprise the Western, like rusty six guns and horses and chaparral.
Sure, that's the romantic.
Just appeal to me.
Yeah, there's a lot of, like, even medieval knights have the same.
But it's one of the more problematic genres generally.
I mean, history is problematic, man. You take any history, like, It's not good.
We do it to ourselves.
We just choose. The reason that we get all like quote uppity about it is that we get uppity about it because most people still think but it's not as bad as like, like the Dark Ages or whatever. It's like, yeah, but that doesn't cure it of its sins. So let's make sure that we send this one down. And I think that reckoning is coming for Westerns. I think it's already been here. It's just, there's going to be a film, I think, that comes out that's going to be like, yep, fuck it. You're all fucking done. This genre is done, more or less. And then there'll be more movies, of course, because that's not how cinema works. It's not like one person makes a movie and then it's done. But, like I do think that there's probably a legendary Western on the horizon. That's gonna be
that will speak to the native experience.
Yeah,
I hope that would be cool. Yeah,
it's gonna fire an entire kind of thing at us, and I think that's.
I gotta believe just because that's such an obvious, vital story to tell that there are some great Westerns from the native point of view, and I bet some of our kind listeners will point us in the direction of some cool indie Westerns. Yeah, I hope.
Please do if you can think of one that really does, but I can't think of one because like I'm pretty
even
well
Dead
versed
Man,
in this.
The native character is like the sidekick.
There was a 93 film called Geronimo. That also had Gene Hackman, that was about this kind of thing, but it's still like at the helm white people telling a story. Like they just made Geronimo like a white hero kind of thing.
I haven't seen Last of the Mohicans, but that's also a white.
Last of
Daniel
Mohicans,
Day-Lewis, right? So
yeah, it's not only just the whitewashing of the casting, which is like literally skin deep, but it's also like when you look at the themes of that movie, it's once again trying to take the Western ethos of its main characters, its heroes, and installing them.
Reconcile how it's good actually that we did this.
Yeah, and like in the same way that it's just like, oh, there's people who are hurt and someone's coming to bat for them, which is, that I don't think that will truly ever get old, but it kind of just slides right past all of the genocide. And it's just like, we can all be friends, baby. And that's, not helpful these days. Maybe it was, as I was, cueing what I was saying before, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, maybe it was helpful. And it was. Unforgiven did good things.
All the steps in the journey are steps in the journey, even if they lose their luster later, like it was a step in the journey, yeah.
Welcome to the 2020s. We're making movies that
we're even more sophisticated than 20 years ago. That's how that works.
Yes. So that's, hopefully people are following kind of my logic there.
I think so.
And yeah, I look forward to, I like the genre because of the same things. There's something romantic about, I'm
excited about Power of the Dog. Or like every time I see a new Western, I'm like, yippee-ki-yay, here we go.
Right. Yeah. And there's a lot, and I love that it has like a history that's like, it's one of the things that Americans, like I know when it comes to cinema, almost everything's American because we're the ones who have the money who made the things, we made the genres. But it's one of those things that we really said like, this is for America though, and then the rest of the world was like, nah. And I love that. I love new wave. I love like describing the spaghetti Western as like Italian new wave. It's very interesting to me. Yeah. Well, that's kind of all I got. We talked about the ethos. We talked about the gender politics. We talked about the historical aspect of it. I don't know.
The deconstructionist aspect, the Oscar
Go watch
bait
it,
aspect.
see if you get this stuff, if you get stuff from it.
The visual aspect is fairly straightforward for the time, so we didn't have much to say about that. Though. It's beautiful, but it's there's nothing that draws the eye. That's why I say he is almost Spielbergian. Actually, he has less flair than Spielberg, which is something.
It's very
very straightforward filmmaking. Clint always has been very straightforward and transparent.
When you're shooting with like candlelight and fires, though, like at nighttime, like
it looks artistic no matter which way you slice it. It's hard to not look
I was
artistic.
just gonna say that, like if you look at something like a TV show like Deadwood, obviously that was like almost 2 decades later, or a decade later, I mean, but like it looks just as good as that. Why? Because it's they chose good sequences to shoot.
Or Lincoln even. to go back to Spielberg, he lit that all with candlelight, and it looks effortlessly fantastic.
And no one's going to deny the absolute beauty of, like, Wyoming. You don't go to Wyoming. Like, I'm sure there's ugly parts of Wyoming. I've never been. But also, you look at the places that they shot in Wyoming, like this big whiskey area, and you see the mountains, the snow-capped mountains, and the rolling hills, and, like, the animals perching all around. And you just go, holy fuck. You know, like, there's nothing. Of course, it's beautiful. So
I think that's one of the main reasons I love Westerns is nature porn. Not enough genres include nature porn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Revenant, that long shot of the clouds forming over the mountain cap, fucking rad. Yep. Yeah.
Love it. Yeah, and this is definitely a genre that feels, because of its usually meditative tone or slow editing, it usually takes its time with that stuff. Mm-hmm. Most of these that we can think of.
Not enough genres are slow-paced footage of nature.
Have you seen Slow West?
No, not yet. I really want to. Is it? Yeah. Should.
It just reminds me because it's got the word slow in it. It's also a meditative Western, so it makes sense. There's a lot of recent Westerns that are not too bad. I hope we keep subverting, because any old genre needs to be subverted all the time. Any genre needs to be subverted all the time. Because if you're old enough to be called a genre, you should, get out of here with your classic bullshit. Mm-hmm. So hopefully, to many more years of just cutting up and serving a little piece of itself to itself for the Western. That's what I hope.
Yeah.
Anything else from you, my man?
No, I don't think so.
It's always a pleasure. Saddle up and just go into the sunset.
Yeah, sometimes I worry that when we don't have a guest, it feels like this is an episode of our deep dives, but I'll get over it.
You'll get over it. It's just how we talk, so.
I'm wondering if people... I was going to tweet this, but I'll just ask it on the air. Tweet at us if you have any favorite guests or guests. I've been wondering, like, are there guests that you get excited when you're like, so-and-so's on this week? We want to know who our most favoriteest guests are. Help us rank our
peanut
friends.
Butter. Yeah. Who's the peanut butter to our chocolate?
Yeah, because we've been thinking about, we sort of go around the horn, and we're thinking about expanding our guest pool right now, or whether people like having recurring guests so they can get to know their personalities. Mm-hmm. Any insights you have on guest strategy, but otherwise, we'll be here.
Yeah.
Adam usually, in some fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Bridget, Sarah.
Bridget and Sarah.
The beans. Yeah. All right, should we hit it?
Let's hit it.
1, 2, 3, go! Bye.
This has been a Small Beans endeavor. We're a bunch of pals who make podcasts, sketches, music, web series, and movies. The Beans always have new ideas percolating, so make sure to check us out at patreon.com/smallbeans. That's patreon.com/smallbeans, where you can browse all of our current and past content, see what we've got planned in the future, and learn how your support can help the Small Beans grow into huge, giant monster beans. If you enjoyed this content module, please like, rate, subscribe, or tell a friend about us. We love you!